Thanks for joining me here in the Fire Mountain Gems and Beads studio. We have got a fabulous, foily, fun project for you today. Let's start collaging, shall we? Now, this design starts with a real clean edge, so I'm going to put that away. I use a lot of my scraps to do projects. But this one starts with a very long tapered triangle. And when I say long, look at that, that's about 5 inches of foil. And I can see a little black clay at the tip. Let's lay this out. Don't be afraid. These are feel a little funny to handle if you're new to this, but they usually won't tear unless you're really, really rough with them or aggressive. But we're going to leave that element there. And we're just going to cut a couple of fun little stripes back and forth too. So let's take a piece here. And we're going to take a piece here. I'm cutting this about 1/8 of an inch thick, and I'm going to flip it so I get different colors next to each other. I could keep you here all day doing this stuff, but we don't have that kind of time. We just want to give you a few ideas, and just a little imagination is all you need. And you'll see some of the fun little samples that we have of this. You can go and get creative ideas and inspiration and figure out a lot of different patterns and tips and tricks for making your little collage elements right there. Okay, so let's do one more of those stripes, and I can double my effort by cutting this in half and abutting it right next to each other. So I've got this beautiful kind of offset gradient thing going, and we're going to take our blade. We'll remove this clay and save it for later. Cut this in half. Now these aren't really attached together, so it's a little tricky lifting them up. They may separate. Don't be alarmed if that happens. Just put them back together. And we're just going to align that right like so. And I'll just use my blade to abut them next to each other. So let's go ahead and make a checkerboard. That's one of my favorite. People always ask me how I do that. So we're just going to cut this as wide as it is long, about 1/8 of an inch, and we're going to offset colors so that we don't have the same colors matching. So you could do like a true checkerboard. You could do silver and blue clay and just use those two colors. But you can see here I'm building a really nice pattern, and we'll do one more little design element that we're going to incorporate into our collage. But look at how fun that is. Very easy. Nobody would think it took you that quick to do it. So we'll set this off to the side here and use it for something else. I'm going to show you how to make swirls and squiggles. All right, let's get all this out of the way. If you're like me, your studio is a creative explosion, and I just find that inspiring rather than confusing. So we're going to go ahead now and take some black clay that we're going to pick up right behind me here. And how thick it is depends on how you're going to design your piece. If you've got a really deep bezel, like these lovely trapezoid bezels here, they're really deep, which I like, especially if I'm using my Magic-Glos resin. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. If I'm using a thinner bezel, like this one here, I'm going to go with a very thin layer of clay. But let's go ahead and show you how to set this. That's enough right there. And actually, notice how I'm using my scissors. One of the most underrated tools in polymer clay, scissors. A lot of people don't think to use them. So that was so much safer and easier than trying to get in there with my clay blade. All right, so what we're going to do is start looking at our piece. And actually, we don't need to design such a big area that we have a lot of wasted effort. So I tend to go in and I trim down so I'm just a little bit bigger than whatever cutter or setting I'm going to use for my piece, because I don't want to spend a lot of time designing clay that I'm just going to cut away later. All right, so we're going to lift that back up, and let's start with a squiggle. So I'm going to start with the tapered end, that really fine little bit, and I'm just going to squiggle. I press it down because raw clay likes to stick to raw clay, so it doesn't take a lot of pressure, and we're just going to go back and forth. And I'm not stretching it too much. I'm just tamping it down and going back and forth and back and forth. Okay? And we'll go ahead and cut a little of that away, and we can save that scrap for another project. Don't forget to save your scraps. There's so much you can do with them. And let's go ahead and pick up. Notice I'm picking it up with the tip of my hobby knife just from the edge so I don't mar it. And we'll put a spot right there. So I'm freestyling. I have no idea what I was going to do in my design when I started. I just had some random thoughts. And it's kind of fun to see how this all comes together. So let's maybe put this heart down here. And we're going to freestyle a heart. You can use a bigger Kemper pattern cutter, but let's go ahead and cut a bigger heart out of here. So because it's not going to be perfect, I'm going for an asymmetrical design, knowing it's not going to be a perfect heart. Okay, and that little trick of sliding our blade underneath and shimmy, shimmy, shimmy. Remember, these pieces aren't connected together from the back, so hopefully this won't fall apart when I reach in there. And look at that. How fun is that? And I can just push those back together. And it looks like I took a lot longer than I actually did, only you know the secret. So let's go ahead and do a swirl. So I'm going to start by pressing down just like we did with our squiggle, and I'm just going to rotate. Now this clay is very strong and forgiving. If my rotation's too tight or there's too much space between it, I can gently lift it back up and reposition it. So I might end this going off the edge of my design, or I might even just kind of morph it into a squiggle around my piece. So that's coming along just nicely. And let's go ahead and do some of the finishing touches with some of these little designs we did right here. And don't be shy about trying to manipulate and contort these pieces to go wherever you like. There's really no right or wrong. You really can't make a mistake with this. Now, some people will want more negative space. That's your background clay. You can do it on different colors of clay. It doesn't have to be black. Black is what's going to give you that faux dichroic quality that I like in my work, and it's what's going to really make the whole thing pop. So let's take advantage here of a little bit of this checkerboarding. And I lost that corner, so that's just one of my favorite things. When things don't go the way I plan them, I don't mind. I just consider it an opportunity for embellishment. So that circle looks real pretty right there. So I can go on and on and on, maybe one or two more little details. I can mirror stripes, but you get the idea. One of the things that happens when you're doing this is not uncommon to maybe get some nicks or marks or fingerprints in your work. And one thing that you can do is texture in your negative space. But I'm going to save that for a second because I'm going to show you a little trick on how to set this into a bezel. So again, all these scraps can be saved, but I'm going to just lift them up and get them out of my way. And we're going to keep it on our tile. This is a time where I like my clay to stick to my work surface. There's times I don't. And in those times, I'll use a piece of parchment or deli paper. And we're going to take this lovely setting. Actually, I like the gunmetal. That's a great finish. And we're going to align it so that we cover our design and gently press down. We don't want to try to cut it out. You're not going to get a clean cut anyway, so don't worry about it. But we're getting a nice impression, an outline of our piece. And this is perfect for when you're doing a setting like a circle, because even if you have a real steady hand, you're probably not going to cut that circle perfectly. And you may take a circular cookie cutter, but it may not be the exact right size. So if I found a cutter that was close, we definitely want one that's smaller than the setting, just by a little bit. I'll show you a trick. So with our straight blade, we're going to come in, and that trick here first is to cut it too small. And I don't mean a lot too small, just a little too small. We're going to cut on the inside of that outline that we created when we emboss the edges of our bezel into the clay. So it's better that it's too small. I can work with that. But too big, you're going to try to trim around the edges. It's just going to make a mess. Trust me, I know this from experience. All right. And we're going to take just a tiny bit of my polybonder glue right here. We don't need a lot. This is just a placeholder, and it'll keep it from shifting. So watch this. I'm just putting in a few strokes. We don't have to cover all the metal. When they said less is more, they were talking about glue. We need a little air in there for the glue to set. Okay, so we're going to pick up our piece, and again, I don't want to stretch or distort it. And check it before you lay it down into the glue. You can even do this step before you put the glue in there. But this is beautiful because it doesn't really fit. And you're thinking, huh? I know, right? Doesn't really fit in there. And that's good. We wanted it smaller. So this is where we can come in with all kinds of tools. You can come in with an awl or a toothpick, and I like to work with different stylus tools, texturing tools. A lot of these are common to paper, but they're wonderful for wax carving or working with metal clays. But I'm going to go in my background there, and I'm going to start stippling. And I'm just doing the background, and I'm pushing from the inside out, so it pushes the clay all the way up to the edges. And it will fill all the gaps. And you just keep working it. Not only does that make it fit my bezel, especially a hard to fit bezel like a round or an oval shape, squares and rectangles and trapezoids are much easier to work with and trim, but it gives a really nice dimensional quality that highlights the foil work that sits on the surface. Okay? You get the idea. So let's take a look at this. When you do collaging, and here I've worked with an open setting. If you want to know some of the tips and tricks for working with open settings for this technique, be sure to check out my pop art clay video. But I worked with a very fine hammered open setting here, and you can see that's where we did that little checkerboarding. And it needs a little finishing off. I need to add an attachment. I can either drill right through the clay and use a pinch bail or jump ring, or I can do the sandwiched attachment that we talked about with bails in the pop art clay videos, something like I did here. But you may want to leave it where it's dimensional and the foil has a bit of a matte finish. If your foil fades, and some of the brighter colors can, don't panic. After the clay cools and you're ready to finish your piece with some findings or put some Magic-Glos on it, you can pop that color back with a permanent marker. So there's lots of different brands out there, but make sure it's permanent. Alcohol and water-based inks will bleed under my resin. If you're not using Magic-Glos resin, you can go ahead and use any color ink you want, but just lightly. Don't scrub it. You'll actually pull the foil off. But you can make the yellow come back to a bright, vibrant yellow. Sometimes the foils fade, especially for clays that bake at a higher temperature. Don't panic, it's an easy fix. But let's go ahead and talk about adding Magic-Glos. So I have a piece here. I did earrings. Again, this is a slightly smaller open setting. And what I did, you can see that now you know enough. This is really simple. So let's get this out of the way so it's a little bit easier to see without the tile in the background. But now you can see I just took that ripple blade and I just cut some pieces of foil. These were actually scraps I had left over, and I just crossed them one over the other to make this basket weave pattern. And then later I went through several bakings and added a decorative border, and then I added a final layer, finishing it off on the back and texturing it with any tool you like. So that's fun, where you've got all the dimensional quality in here, and sandwiched in between is just a copper eye pin that I bent in the middle so it can't pull out, and added a dangle. But let's take a look at what it would look like to put some Magic-Glos on here. So even though I just need one layer for my Magic-Glos, I'm actually going to do it in two. We'll show you one, we'll talk about the second. And here's a great use for our scrap clay. We'll just grab some of those scraps right here, and we're making a pedestal. On an open setting or a bezel setting where you're going to bring up the Magic-Glos in a domed effect, you really want to go ahead and do two layers. That helps control any bubbles from forming, but it also gives you a chance to see how thick you want to make it. So we want a pedestal that's smaller than what we're setting it on. And this allows us to do a couple cool things. It allows us to level our piece, and it keeps it from sliding off of our cure tray. I just use a small piece of glass from tiny picture frames, or a ceramic tile, or a craft mirror. But you just want a cure surface. It can even be an old hotel card key. And we'll take Magic-Glos. This is the 1 ounce size. You can also get it in the 6 ounce size. But you always add less than you think you need. That's tip number 1. Tip number 2, always add it from the middle. All right, so we're going to squeeze this out here. So we add less than we think we need, and then we're going to spread it with our craft knife. So, okay, and you're just going to spread it out and let it self-level. Then you can also just flash it. If you've got a butane torch or a windproof lighter, you can just flash it for a quick second, and any bubbles that are on or near the surface will pop. But we'll spread it out to the edges, it'll hold a bead, and then it will go into the UV light for 5 to 10 minutes or out in the sun. And you don't want to leave it in too long because that can cause yellowing. It doesn't take much more than 5 to 10 minutes. I would come back and let's go ahead and you'd add a second layer. You don't have to bring it domed. You can bring it right up flat and flush to the surface. There are the edges of your bezel, but the choice is yours. You've got a lot that you can do with it. But let's take a look here at what it looks like when it's done with the layer of Magic-Glos on the top. So it looks like faux dichroic glass. And if your head is spinning, I'm just going to leave you with a couple more little tips, but it's a fun spin, isn't it? I think it is. In here you can see these lovely flowers. People ask me how I did them. You can just foil thin sheets of clay and bake them right on your tile, and you can use all those fun decorative punches for scrapbooking to make different shapes. I punch those shapes out and you can just press them into your raw clay as you make your collages. And here, this piece that looks very complex, as you can see, all I did was take that ripple blade and I abutted just ripple lines of clay, kind of like we did when we started the checkerboard. So it can look amazingly complex, but it can be really deceptively simple. So I hope you've enjoyed having fun with foil. I hope I've inspired you to get your creative on. And thanks for joining me here today in Fire Mountain Gems and Beads Design Studio. Happy playing.